Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today, we're strapping in and heading to Slovakia. Well, not literally.
Right, not for vacation or anything.
No. We're taking a deep dive into their legal system. Specifically, this document we have, it's called Pravna Osobnosti 2.pocus.pdf.
Quite a mouthful.
Yeah, I know, right? But it's all about how Slovakia safeguards personal rights. Imagine, like, you're living in Slovakia. What happens if someone uses your photo without permission, spreads some nasty rumors about you, or even, like, tries to control your personal data?
That's where these legal protections come in.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to be uncovering today, like how Slovakia goes about protecting its citizens' individuality, their dignity, their freedom.
You know, it's interesting. This whole thing about personality rights
Yeah.
in Slovakia, it's not just for individuals.
Wait, really?
Yeah, this document, it shows that even companies and organizations, they have these rights too.
So, like, a company could sue someone for, I don't know, bad-mouthing their product or something. Like, they have feelings too.
Exactly. There was this case back in 2015, this Slovakian dairy company. They actually sued a competitor. The competitor was spreading false info about the quality of their milk.
Wow, like a milk smearing campaign.
I guess you could say that. And the dairy company, they won the case. It just shows how serious Slovakia is about protecting reputations, not just for people, but for entities within their system, too.
That's wild. Okay, so let's break this down a bit. Legal protection of personality. Pravna ochrana osobnosti. It's a little bit, I don't know.
Jargony.
Yeah, like something straight out of law textbook.
It does sound a bit formal, right? But really it boils down to this. Slovakia is committed to making sure that people and even organizations aren't being like unfairly exploited or harmed.
Yeah.
Safeguarding people's individuality, their freedom, and their right to, just a dignified existence.
Makes sense. So where do these rights come from? Is it all like laid out in one big, impressive document?
Actually, no. It's kind of woven into a bunch of different legal documents, which makes this deep dive all the more interesting, right? You got their constitution, their civil code, media laws, even their criminal code. All these things play a part in upholding these rights.
Okay, so it's not just one place you look. It's this interconnected legal web. Gotcha. Now, this document keeps mentioning general and specific personal rights. What's the difference there?
Okay, imagine it like this. General rights, they're like the essentials. They apply to everyone in Slovakia. Things like the right to life, liberty, security,
Yeah.
Basic human dignity stuff.
Okay, the essentials. Got it.
Then you have specific rights. Think of them as more like tailored suits, linked to individual creations or achievements.
So, like, everyone has the right to privacy, but only I have the rights to, I don't know, like a song I wrote or a dance move I invented.
You got it. That distinction, it helps determine who's protected, how those rights come into being, how they're enforced. Slovakia, they guarantee some really interesting specific rights. Protection against discrimination, the right to your image, your name, even your voice recordings. It's pretty cool.
Wow, they thought of everything. Speaking of specifics, this document, it dives into sections 11 through 16 of the Slovakian Civil Code. What's so special about these sections?
Well, you can think of these sections as the nuts and bolts of how personal rights are actually protected in Slovakia, where the theory meets the actual practice.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So, like, what if someone posted my private diary online without my permission?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Would I have, like, any legal recourse in Slovakia? Could I do something about it?
You absolutely might. Those sections of the Civil Code, that would be your go-to. They lay out the framework for seeking legal remedies. So you could like demand they take it down, maybe even pursue some kind of compensation for, the harm caused.
This is making me realize just how, like, complex this whole system is, but also, like, how crucial these protections are.
Right. It's something you don't think about every day.
Exactly, until you need it.
And it's not just the Civil Code. You have to remember, Slovakia's constitution, their ultimate legal authority, it guarantees a system for upholding these rights too. Certain articles in there, they've shaped court decisions, legal practices all across the country.
So the Constitution's like the big picture, and then the Civil Code gets into the specifics.
You got it. And that constitutional backing, it's crucial because it gives people the ability to challenge laws or actions that might infringe on those rights. It's like a safety net.
Gotcha. Okay, this document mentions this legal term that always kind of throws me off. Objective versus subjective.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Help me out here. What does that even mean?
Okay, so imagine this. Someone uses your photo for a billboard without asking. But they swear they didn't mean any harm. They just, thought you looked great. That's where objective versus subjective comes in.
Okay, so even if they didn't intend to violate my rights, they could still be in trouble because the action itself was a violation.
Bingo. It's recognizing that harm can occur, even without bad intentions. This idea, it's been at the center of a bunch of Slovakian court cases, which we can get into more later.
I'm already feeling a little overwhelmed. We've only just scratched the surface.
Don't worry, we'll break it all down.
All this talk about protecting personality, it makes me wonder, how do they actually define that in Slovakia? Is it just about, like, our physical selves?
That's where Slovakian law gets really insightful. They recognize that personality, it's so much more than your body. It's about your reputation, your freedom to express yourself, your personal privacy, basically the elements that make you you in the eyes of the law. In 2018, a Slovakian court, they ruled that a website publishing private photos without consent, that was a violation of personality rights, even though no physical harm was done.
So they're protecting, like, your essence, going beyond just the physical. That's a pretty powerful idea.
It is powerful. And it makes you think about how these rights play out in our relationships with others. You know, personal rights, they can't exist in isolation. They shape how we interact with each other. They create responsibilities within those relationships.
It's a balance, for sure. Speaking of balancing acts, it seems like there could be a lot of different people involved in these legal battles. It's not always just like me versus them, right?
You're right. There are so many potential players in these cases.
Hmm.
Individuals, companies, organizations, even the Slovakian state itself.
Yeah.
Each can have a role in upholding or even challenging personal rights.
Mm.
Makes it pretty interesting, actually.
Definitely adds another layer to things. But even with all these complexities, at the end of the day, it's about protecting the individual, right?
Absolutely. That's what these personal rights are all about.
This has been really eye-opening so far. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to explore. I'm ready to dive into some real-world examples.
Let's do it. Let's see how these principles actually play out in the Slovakian legal system. All right, so let's get into some of those real-world cases. See how these sections of the Civil Code, 11 through 16, they actually played out in court. These sections, they cover a lot. But let's start with Section 11. This one protects people from, malicious interference in their personal and family lives. Imagine, like, someone spreading harmful lies about your family or just constantly harassing you at home.
That sounds awful. So, like, how does Section 11 actually help in those situations?
Well, it gives people a legal basis to, fight back. They can take the case to court, demand that the harassment stops, maybe seek remedies for the harm that was caused, potentially even, like, financial compensation.
So it's not just about, like, defining the right to privacy. It's about giving people the tools to actually enforce it.
Exactly. Now, Section 12, this one is particularly interesting. It focuses on protecting honor and dignity, things like defamation.
Defamation, okay.
Right, there was this fascinating case back in 2019. A Slovakian politician,
Yeah.
they sued a newspaper for publishing an article that, accused them of corruption.
Wow, a politician suing for defamation. That sounds like a headline in itself. What happened?
Well, the court actually ruled in the politician's favor. They found that the article, it did damage the politician's reputation, caused them significant distress.
So, like, emotional damage.
Right. And the newspaper, they were ordered to, like, issue a retraction, apologize publicly, and they had to pay damages. It's a perfect example of how Section 12, it can be used to safeguard people's reputations and to hold those who spread, false information accountable.
It's like having a shield against attacks on your character, which sometimes those attacks can have, real world consequences.
Oh, for sure. They can really impact your life.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to Section 13. This one, it takes that idea of protection into, like, the public sphere, safeguarding your image in the context of things like media, advertising.
So this is about preventing people from using your photo without permission, especially, like, if they're making money off of it.
Exactly. Picture this. You're walking down the street and suddenly, bam, there's your face on a giant billboard advertising something random, like shoes that you've never even seen before. Section 13 gives you grounds to challenge that, like, hey, that's me, and I never agreed to this.
It's about, like, asserting control over your own identity in a world where images can be just, like, splashed everywhere.
Exactly. And it's not just about commercial use either. Imagine, like, a news outlet uses your photo in a story, but it portrays you in a negative light. Section 13, it offers legal options there too.
So it's making sure that you're not being misrepresented or exploited through the use of your image.
Precisely. And looks like Slovakia, they're really dedicated to protecting people, extending those protections into the workplace with Section 14, right?
Yeah.
Didn't you say the one deals with, like, work and employment stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Section 14 focuses on protecting employees from the misuse of their personal information by their employers, particularly their health information.
Oh, that's really important.
Right. Like imagine your employer shared sensitive medical details about you with your colleagues without your consent. Not cool. But Section 14 gives you the power to challenge that kind of privacy violation.
It's like saying, hey, my personal life doesn't completely disappear when I clock in for work.
Yeah,
I still have rights.
exactly. It's about respecting boundaries.
And Section 14, it recognizes that even within the workplace, you deserve protection from those kinds of intrusions into your personal life. All right, let's move on to Section 15. This one, it feels like it really gets to the core of privacy protection, all about, safeguarding individuals from those Big Brother style intrusions into their lives.
It's giving me chills just thinking about it. So if someone is secretly recording my conversations or tracking my movements without my knowledge, Section 15 would give me some legal options.
Absolutely. This section, it provides a really strong legal basis for challenging those types of privacy violations. You could seek remedies to, stop the intrusion, potentially hold those responsible accountable. There was actually a case in Slovakia a few years ago. A woman, she successfully sued her neighbor for installing hidden cameras pointed right at her property.
Whoa, creepy neighbor alert.
I know, right? But see, it's not just the theoretical right. People are actually using this law to protect themselves from those creepy, intrusions into their lives. Section 15, it helps to establish clear boundaries and to protect that fundamental right to a private life, which is so important. Okay, and last but certainly not least, we have Section 16. This one tackles the, increasingly important issue of personal data protection. Feels especially relevant these days with everything being online.
Right, the digital age.
Exactly. This section, it's all about the collection, processing, and disclosure of personal data. Think about it. So much of our lives is online now. Data is constantly being gathered, shared, analyzed. Section 16 provides this vital framework to make sure that our personal information is being handled responsibly.
So let's say a company is collecting data about my online habits without me knowing, or using my information for purposes that I never agreed to. Could I do anything about that under Section 16?
Absolutely. This section gives you the right to know what data they're collecting, how they're using it, and to challenge any misuse or unauthorized disclosure of your personal information. It puts you back in the driver's seat.
It's like saying, hey, this is my data. I have a say in how it's used.
You got it. Section 16, it's a cornerstone of Slovakia's efforts to protect individuals in this digital age. It acknowledges that personal data, it deserves those strong legal safeguards, and Slovakia seems committed to providing them.
This has been really insightful. Hearing about all these cases, these specific protections, it really brings it all to life. Makes you realize this stuff, it's not just abstract legal theory. It's about real people facing real challenges. And Slovakia, they're taking steps to make sure that their citizens have the tools to protect themselves.
I agree. It's fascinating to see how these principles play out in practice. And Slovakia seems to be taking a very comprehensive and proactive approach to safeguarding personal rights, which is really encouraging.
It's making me think about how Slovakia's legal system fits into the global picture of human rights. Are they ahead of the curve, behind the curve, on par? Where do they stand?
That's a great question. And to answer that, we need to step back a bit and look at the bigger picture. Slovakian law, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's deeply connected to international human rights principles, agreements that have been evolving for centuries.
So we're talking about a much longer history here.
Exactly. Think ancient legal codes, modern declarations like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Okay, so Slovakia's approach to personal rights, it's part of this much broader global movement towards recognizing the inherent dignity of every person.
Precisely. And their constitution, the highest law in the land, it reflects that commitment. Explicitly guarantees protection of fundamental rights and freedoms, including those related to, personal autonomy, privacy, and dignity.
So the Constitution sets the stage, and then specific laws, like these sections of the Civil Code we've been discussing, they provide the detailed rules for how those principles are actually put into action.
You got it. And it's not just theoretical either. Slovakian courts, they actively enforce these rights. They issue rulings, uphold individuals' claims, hold those who violate those rights accountable.
So there are real consequences for those who step over the line.
Absolutely. And these court decisions, they shape legal precedents, which solidifies the protection of those personal rights in Slovakia.
It's amazing how it all works together, constantly evolving through legal interpretation and application in real life.
It is a dynamic process, for sure. Okay, you ready for another round? Was objective versus subjective. I know you were curious about that earlier.
Oh, yeah. Bring it on. My brain is warmed up now.
Okay, good. Remember, it's all about the role of intent in these cases. Objective refers to the action itself. Did it violate someone's rights? Regardless of what the person intended to do.
Okay, so the action matters.
Right. And then subjective, it looks at the person's state of mind. Did they mean to cause harm?
So even if someone didn't set out to intentionally violate my rights, they could still be in hot water if their actions led to a violation.
That's right. It's a really nuanced area of the law. It acknowledges that harm can occur even without malicious intent. Like imagine a journalist publishes a photo of you without your permission as part of, I don't know, some news story. They might argue, hey, I didn't intend to cause harm. But if the court decides that using your photo, it violated your rights, well, they could still be held accountable.
It seems like it could get pretty tricky to sort out like what their intent was.
You're not wrong. It can be a tough legal puzzle. But ultimately, it's about balancing that need to protect people's rights with the understanding that not every violation is, like, deliberate or malicious.
Makes sense. This is making me think about the whole concept of personality and how it's defined in Slovakian law. It goes beyond just our physical selves, right? It includes things like reputation, freedom of expression, privacy. It's about protecting all the elements that make us like unique individuals.
Exactly. The source material, it emphasizes that personality. It's this dynamic, evolving thing. It changes throughout our lives. And the law needs to adapt to protect those changing aspects of who we are.
So it's not just about protecting who we are today, but also who we become in the future. Kind of like a legal safety net for our like evolving selves.
I like that. A safety net. You've got it. And this brings up another interesting point. What about protection after someone dies? Do those rights just disappear?
That's a good question. It never even occurred to me. Like, if someone's gone, can their rights still be violated?
Well, while personal rights are inherently tied to, a living person, Slovakian law does offer some protection even after death.
Really? So even though a person is no longer around to, like, assert those rights, the law still acknowledges that they matter.
Yes, exactly. And the source material points to Section 15 of the Civil Code. This section specifically addresses this whole idea of posthumous protection. It grants certain close relatives, like spouses, children, parents, the right to defend the deceased person's personality rights.
So they kind of become guardians of the person's legacy.
Right. They can step in and, take legal action if someone's using the deceased person's image or name in a way that's disrespectful or damaging to their memory.
So it's like saying, hey, even in death, a person's dignity and reputation deserve to be protected. That's a pretty powerful statement about the, like, enduring value of personal rights.
It is powerful. It suggests that personal rights, they're not just about individual interests. They're about societal values, respect for human dignity, and preserving those legacies.
Okay, this has been a whirlwind tour so far. We've covered so much ground, from these specific sections of the Slovakian Civil Code to like this broader context of human rights and how it all fits together. But it all leads me to this big question. Are there any situations where personal rights can actually be restricted? Like, is it ever okay to limit those freedoms, even if it's just temporary?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer is yes, there are certain situations where even these, fundamental rights, they can be limited.
Okay, so there are exceptions.
Right. But those limitations, they're not taken lightly. Slovakian law, it recognizes that sometimes other important interests might outweigh individual rights, but those restrictions are only allowed under very specific, carefully defined conditions.
So it's a carefully balanced scale, you're saying, weighing like individual liberties against the needs of society as a whole.
Exactly. And the source material really stresses this point. Any restrictions on personal rights, they have to be clearly defined by law. It can't be arbitrary or based on, vague justifications. There needs to be a solid legal basis for any limitation.
So it can't be the government just saying, hey, we think this is necessary, and then just like start restricting people's rights.
Nope, not at all. There needs to be a valid legal reason, a clearly defined process.
Checks and balances.
You got it. And it's not just about the government making the rules either. Those restrictions, they have to be subject to judicial review.
So the courts step in.
Yep, the courts make sure that the government isn't overstepping their boundaries and that any limitations on personal rights are genuinely justified.
The courts are like the referees in this whole system.
That's a good way to put it. It's about striking that balance between protecting individual freedoms, but also making sure that society as a whole is functioning smoothly. Now, in addition to those, like limited circumstances where restrictions might be justified, you also have some specific exceptions that are written directly into Slovakian law. These allow for the use of personal information without needing explicit consent.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned those before. Things like official purposes and artistic expression as like potential exceptions.
Exactly. These exceptions, they're meant to address specific situations where, like, the public interest or other important values might outweigh an individual's right to have, complete control over their information.
It sounds like these could be like gray areas.
They can be, for sure, which is why they're very narrowly defined. It's to prevent abuse and make sure that the core principles of personal rights protection are still strong.
It's like trying to thread a needle. You got to find that perfect balance between allowing for those like necessary exceptions, but still upholding that fundamental right to privacy.
You nailed it. It's a delicate balancing act. So, for example, official purposes, it often refers to situations where government agencies need to use personal information to carry out their duties,
Yeah.
right? Their legitimate functions. Think like law enforcement needing to access personal data during a criminal investigation.
Okay, so it's not a free-for-all for the government to access anyone's data for any reason they want.
Not at all. Those agencies, they still have to follow very strict rules, got to protect privacy, make sure the information is only used for its intended purpose.
Makes sense. And then there's the exception for like artistic expression. We touched on that a bit earlier. This one acknowledges that artists, they often draw inspiration from real life. Sometimes that means using like real people's names, likenesses, even their stories in their work.
Right. But using that personal information has to genuinely be for artistic reasons,
Hmm.
not just a way to like exploit or humiliate someone. If a musician, let's say, wants to write a song inspired by someone's life, they should really think about how it might impact that person's privacy, their reputation.
So even with these exceptions, there's still a responsibility to like treat people with respect.
Exactly. And it's up to the courts to decide, case by case, whether the use of that personal information is justified or if it crosses the line into a rights violation. These exceptions, they're a good reminder that the law, it's not always about black and white. It's about carefully weighing different interests, coming up with solutions that protect individual rights, but also promote the greater good.
Finding that sweet spot, huh? Where individual freedom and the needs of society can coexist.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how Slovakia defines and protects these personal rights. But what happens when those rights are actually violated? Like, what can individuals do? What are their options?
Yeah, let's talk consequences.
Right. Slovakia, they don't just define these rights, they provide a way to actually enforce them, hold those who violate them accountable. This document we have, it outlines a whole range of legal remedies that are available.
So it's not just about having these rights written down on paper, it's about having like the actual tools to defend them.
You got it. And those remedies, they can be really tailored to the specific situation. Like, say, someone is spreading lies about you. Well, you could demand that they retract those statements,
Yeah.
issue a public apology, try to repair the damage to your reputation.
So taking action to set the record straight.
Right. Or imagine a company uses your image without permission for a big ad campaign. They make tons of money off of it. Well, you could take them to court, demand they stop using your image, and maybe even get financial compensation for, the profit they made off of you.
So there can be real financial consequences for those who try to like profit from violating someone's rights.
Absolutely. And
Uh,
sometimes, depending on how serious the violation is, criminal charges might even be on the table.
mhm.
Think about things like physical assault, harassment, stalking. Those actions, they go beyond just violating personal rights. They threaten people's safety, their well-being.
It makes sense. Different levels of violations call for different responses.
Exactly. And that's what makes these rights meaningful. It's not just words on paper. It's about having real ways to protect yourself, to seek justice when your rights have been violated. It gives those rights teeth. And it seems like Slovakia, they're serious about making sure those teeth are sharp.
It's been really interesting hearing about all these different cases and seeing how Slovakia has approached this whole issue of personal rights protection. It's pretty impressive.
It is. And I think it's a good reminder that we all have a role to play in, upholding these rights, making sure that everyone's treated with respect and dignity.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today, but this is really just the beginning of the conversation.
Right. There's always more to explore.
Exactly. We've talked about these broader principles, the legal framework, the remedies, but I'm really curious to dive even deeper into the specifics of how Slovakian law actually defines and protects those different facets of personality that we've been discussing.
Okay, I like where you're going with this. Let's get even more granular. Let's break down those different facets of personality and see how Slovakian law tackles each one. Okay, so let's break down those facets of personality that Slovakian law works so hard to protect. We've got to start with the most basic one, right? Physical integrity. This is all about safeguarding your very existence, your life, your health, your body. It's like the foundation of everything else.
Right, like the bedrock upon which all other rights are built.
Exactly. Without that right to exist safely and securely, all those other freedoms, they don't really mean much, do they?
Nope, not at all.
And Slovakian law gets that. They have these really strong protections against anything that threatens a person's physical well-being. Think like assault, medical malpractice, even being exposed to dangerous conditions. It's about ensuring that everyone has the right to live a life free from physical harm and coercion.
It makes me think about those medical dramas on TV where the doctors are always asking for consent before they do anything. That feels connected to this whole idea of physical integrity, right?
It totally is. Informed consent in medical settings, it's a key part of protecting physical integrity. Patients have the right to make decisions about what happens to their own bodies. No one can force them to undergo a procedure they don't want.
Okay, so physical integrity is like the base layer. What comes next in this hierarchy of rights?
Building on that foundation, you have the concept of personal freedom. This one's pretty broad. It covers a lot of ground. Think freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of association, all those rights that let us live our lives the way we want to.
Right, those freedoms that allow us to chart our own course, express ourselves, connect with others. Without them, it feels like we're not really in control of our own destinies.
Exactly. Slovakian law recognizes that personal freedom, it's essential for people to grow, learn, and contribute to society. It protects our ability to make choices about our own lives, to pursue our own paths without undue interference.
It's interesting to think about how all those different freedoms, they intertwine and support each other. Like, how can you really exercise freedom of speech if you don't have the freedom to hang out with people who share your views?
Ooh, that's a good point. You're right, those freedoms are interconnected.
Yeah.
Restricting one can often have a ripple effect, limiting the others.
Okay, so we've got physical integrity, personal freedom. What other big pieces of personality does Slovakian law try to protect?
Well, a really crucial one is equality. This is a cornerstone of the Slovakian legal system. It's even enshrined in their constitution.
Right, so we're talking about ensuring that everyone is treated fairly and equally under the law, regardless of their background, their beliefs, all that.
Exactly. Slovakia has laws that specifically prohibit discrimination based on things like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, disability. Those laws, they're meant to create a level playing field where everyone has the same opportunities and protections, regardless of who they are or what they believe.
That feels like the bedrock of a just society.
It is.
If people are being discriminated against, how can they really exercise their other freedoms?
You're absolutely right. Equality is essential for ensuring that all those other rights can actually be enjoyed.
Mm.
It's like the foundation upon which a fair and just society is built.
So much of what we've been talking about focuses on protecting people from harm or intrusion, but personality, it also includes those positive attributes, right? Things like our reputation, our dignity.
You're totally right. Reputation, the way others see us, it's valuable. And Slovakian law gives us ways to defend it. Think about defamation lawsuits, for instance. Those can help protect against false or damaging statements that could hurt someone's reputation.
Right, it's about safeguarding our good name, our standing in society, which can be really important for our jobs, our relationships, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. And then hand in hand with reputation, you have this idea of dignity, the inherent worth that every person has. It's about being treated with respect, regardless of our circumstances or background.
This one feels especially deep. It's acknowledging that each human being has intrinsic value simply because they're human.
Exactly. Slovakian law recognizes that dignity is fundamental to human existence and has to be respected in all interactions between individuals and the state. It sets a tone for a society that values each person.
As we're talking about all these different aspects of personality, it strikes me how much this legal framework has to adapt to keep up with modern life. It's not just about physical harm anymore. Think about how much of our lives is online now. That brings up a whole new set of challenges around privacy.
Oh, absolutely. You're so right. Privacy, that right to control our personal information, to keep certain parts of our lives private, that's a core element of personality. It's about setting boundaries, having a space where we can be ourselves, free from unwanted intrusion.
Yeah, that need to have some things just for ourselves. I think most people can relate to that. But with all the data that's collected these days, it's like it's getting harder and harder to protect that personal space.
It's a real challenge. And that's exactly why Slovakian law provides those strong protections against things like surveillance, unauthorized access to personal data, disclosure of sensitive information. It recognizes that individuals have a right to control what information is shared about them and to set limits on how that information is used.
It's like trying to build a fence around our digital lives.
Love that analogy. And those fences are becoming more important than ever.
And then building on that whole idea of privacy, you have the even more specialized area of personal data protection. This is where things get really complex, I think, especially with the internet and all the different ways data is being used.
It's a whole other level. Think about it. All those websites you visit, the apps you use, the things you buy online, it all creates data about you.
Yeah.
And that data, it's valuable to companies and organizations. They want to use it for all sorts of things. So having laws in place that make sure it's handled responsibly, that's essential.
It's like our data has become this like valuable resource. It needs to be protected from misuse or exploitation.
Exactly. And Slovakian law, it has specific regulations about how that data can be collected, stored, used. It emphasizes transparency, meaning you should know what data they have about you and how they're using it. It emphasizes consent, meaning you should have a say in how your data is used. And it emphasizes security, meaning companies have to take steps to protect your data from breaches or unauthorized access.
So it's not just about saying, don't collect my data. It's about setting clear rules of the road and giving individuals more control over their own information.
You got it.
Oh,
It's about empowering people and holding those who handle that data accountable. And these issues are only going to become more and more important as technology keeps advancing.
it's amazing to see how Slovakia has developed this like really comprehensive legal framework to address these complex and always evolving issues around personal rights. It's clear that they really value these rights.
Absolutely. They put a lot of thought into this.
Yeah.
And it's worth emphasizing that these rights, they're not static, they're not set in stone. They evolve and adapt as our values change and as new technologies come along.
Right, like we're seeing new challenges pop up all the time. AI, facial recognition, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. The law has to keep pace to make sure people are protected, even as the world changes around us.
It's like a constant game of catch-up. But it's encouraging to see that countries like Slovakia are taking those steps to stay ahead of the curve. And this whole conversation has been incredibly eye-opening. It's clear that protecting these rights isn't just the job of lawmakers and courts, it's a responsibility we all share to respect each other's dignity, privacy, and freedom.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's through that shared commitment to these values that we can build a world where everyone can thrive, where everyone feels safe and respected.
That's a great place to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of personal rights protection in Slovakia. We've learned a lot today, but this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
There's always more to discover.
Exactly. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning. And as always, thanks for listening.